On the morning of my 22nd birthday, my grandmother didn't say, "Happy birthday." She didn't hug me or smile or hand me a wrapped box. She looked at me the way she used to look at contractors when they tried to overcharge her, calm, sharp, and already 10 steps ahead, and said, "Sit down. This will change how people treat you." I thought she was exaggerating. She always did that when she wanted my attention. But then she slid a thin black folder across the table, tapped it once with her finger, and said, "You now own everything I built." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it sounded impossible. My grandmother didn't do impossible. She did deliberate. She did precise. And as I opened the folder, page by page, my laughter faded into something heavier. The documents listed properties I recognized only from childhood stories, hotels I'd stayed in once or twice, buildings she referred to as projects the way other people talked about pets. The final page listed a valuation just shy of $36 million. My name was typed cleanly, where her signature used to be. "It transfers at midnight," she said. "No conditions. No trustees. No safety rails." I stared at her. "You're serious?" She nodded. "Deadly." I asked the first stupid question everyone asks when their life tilts sideways. "Why me?" She leaned back in her chair. "Because you haven't learned how to ask for permission yet. That should have warned me." Before I could say anything else, she added, "Your mother doesn't know. And when she finds out, you'll learn very quickly who believes love is unconditional." I didn't understand what she meant until that night. I grew up in my mother's penthouse, but it was never really home. It was a showroom. White walls, curated furniture, art chosen for status instead of joy. When I walked in that evening, every light was on. My mother stood by the window like she was waiting for a confrontation she'd rehearsed. Her new husband, Daniel Crow, stood beside her. Too close. Too composed. They already knew. Daniel spoke first, as if this were a business meeting he was chairing. He congratulated me. He told me how proud he was. Then he started explaining what we would do next. We. That word landed wrong. He talked about risk exposure, asset optimization, professional oversight. He said I was brilliant, but inexperienced. He said families should handle things together. My mother nodded, adding that she just wanted to protect me from making mistakes. I listened until he said the sentence that ended everything. "We'll need you to sign temporary authority over operations, just until things stabilize." I looked at my mother. "You want me to give up control of something Grandma gave me outright?" Her expression hardened. "I want you to stop acting like a child with a toy you don't understand." I said no. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just said no. The silence afterward felt surgical. My mother stared at me, then said, "If you won't trust us, you don't need to live here." Daniel didn't intervene. He didn't need to. He watched, satisfied, like a man watching gravity do its job. I packed that night. I didn't cry until I reached my grandmother's house. She was waiting, as if she'd expected me hours earlier. "Good," she said when she saw my suitcase. "That went faster than I thought." She poured me tea, then opened a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. "Now that you've been properly introduced to the game, it's time you understand the board." Inside were financial statements, corporate registrations, and emails Daniel never meant for me to see. He'd been planning for my inheritance before my birthday, before his wedding, before he ever called himself family. "He didn't marry your mother for love," my grandmother said. "He married her for proximity." I felt sick. "Does she know?" "She knows enough to ignore," my grandmother replied. "Which is more dangerous." For a week, nothing happened. Then Daniel filed paperwork. He didn't challenge ownership. He didn't need to. He requested emergency oversight, citing concern for asset stability given the emotional state of a young heir. A judge, seeing family conflict and large sums of money, granted temporary restrictions. I walked into one of my own hotels 2 days later and saw Daniel standing at the front desk with a clipboard. "Consultative role," he said pleasantly. "Just until everything settles." The changes started immediately. Staff hours cut. Local vendors replaced. Policies rewritten. Guests complained. The atmosphere shifted. It felt like watching someone slowly dim the lights in a room while insisting nothing had changed. I told my grandmother he was sabotaging the place on purpose. "Of course he is," she said. "He wants to prove you can't handle it. So, what do we do?" She smiled. "We let him." That terrified me. Instead of fighting him in court, we did something worse. We let him talk. Every meeting, every directive, every smug explanation about why my objections were emotional. I recorded it all. So did my grandmother. So did 2 board members he didn't realize were loyal to her, not him. Then she made one phone call. She didn't call a lawyer. She called a lender. Then another. Then an insurer. Then an investor who'd quietly backed Daniel's projects for years. She didn't accuse him. She didn't threaten. She just asked questions. "Are you comfortable?" she asked calmly, with a man attempting to gain control of assets he does not own by manufacturing instability. Money hates questions. Within weeks, Daniel's financial support thinned. Deals paused. Calls stopped getting returned. He blamed the market. He blamed timing. He blamed me. Then my grandmother activated the clause. Buried in the trust was a provision she'd added years earlier, a contingency triggered by documented coercion against the beneficiary. The recordings qualified. Overnight, Daniel's authority evaporated. The court didn't punish him. It didn't need to. It simply removed him. He tried to negotiate. He tried to intimidate. He tried to guilt my mother into fighting for him. She didn't. Without his access to power, his charm vanished. The marriage followed. Months later, I stood in the hotel lobby watching staff laugh again, watching guests linger, watching something broken slowly heal. My mother asked to meet me eventually. She didn't apologize properly, but she didn't defend him either. "I thought being with someone strong would make me safe," she said. I nodded. "It just made you blind. We're not close. We're careful." My grandmother watched all of this quietly. One night, she sat beside me on the rooftop and said, "I didn't give you money to make you comfortable. I gave it to see if you'd survive discomfort without folding." I understood then. The inheritance wasn't the hotel. It was the lesson. Power doesn't announce itself loudly. Manipulation doesn't look cruel at first. And love that demands surrender isn't love at all. Daniel thought I was young. My mother thought I was naive. They were both wrong. And the building still stands, not because I inherited it, but because I learned when not to hand it over. Winning doesn't feel like relief. It feels like silence. After Daniel was removed, after the paperwork settled, and the hotel returned fully to my hands, people assumed my life snapped back into place. That I slept better. That the tension drained away. That I felt victorious. I didn't. What no one tells you is that when the threat disappears, your nervous system doesn't get the memo. You still wake up listening for footsteps. You still reread emails for tone. You still flinch when someone compliments you too carefully. Power teaches paranoia faster than confidence. The first sign that the story wasn't finished came 3 weeks later, disguised as good news. An investor requested a meeting. Not just any investor. One of the largest private hospitality funds on the East Coast. Old money. Quiet money. The kind that doesn't chase deals, they wait for them to come limping in. I almost said no. But my grandmother surprised me. "You'll take the meeting," she said. "Not because you need them. Because you need to see how predators behave when they lose one hunt and go looking for another." We met in a private dining room overlooking the river. No lawyers. No assistants. Just polished wood, soft voices, and a man who smiled without showing teeth. He congratulated me, called my situation impressive resilience. Then he asked one innocent question. "So," he said, "how long do you plan to run this yourself?" There it was. Not an offer. A test. I answered calmly. "As long as it needs to be run." He nodded, as if that confirmed something. "Temporary confidence," his eyes said. "We'll circle back." He left without making an offer. 2 days later, rumors started. Anonymous tips appeared online questioning my competence. An article floated the idea that I was emotionally entangled in the property due to family drama. Nothing actionable. Nothing illegal. Just enough to plant doubt. I didn't need to ask who was behind it. Daniel had lost control, but not ambition. That's when my grandmother told me the part she'd been holding back. "I didn't beat Daniel for you," she said one evening, pouring wine she didn't drink. I slowed him down. She explained that men like him don't disappear. They regroup. They rebrand. They wait for the moment when you're tired of being vigilant. "And you're tired," she said flatly. She was right. Running a hotel isn't romantic. It's relentless. Every decision has consequences. Every mistake costs money or trust or both. And every success attracts attention you didn't ask for. One morning, I found a handwritten note slipped under my office door. "Proud of how far you've come. Still room to grow. Call me." No signature. That night, my mother called. Not crying. Not defensive. Just quiet. "He reached out to me," she said. My chest tightened. "Daniel?" "Yes." She said he wanted closure. Said he'd been misunderstood. Said he still cared about her. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I said, "If you meet him, you're choosing him over me again." She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I need to know who I am without being afraid of being alone." She met him. Nothing happened at first. Then small things shifted. She defended him casually. Questioned my tone. Suggested I was being harsh. The pattern was familiar. I didn't confront her. I didn't warn her. I prepared. 3 months later, Daniel resurfaced publicly, not as a husband, not as a villain, but as a consultant. He joined a redevelopment board 2 neighborhoods away. Then another. Always adjacent. Never overlapping. Always watching. The final move came disguised as generosity. He sent me an offer through an intermediary. No takeover. No control. Just capital for expansion. Clean money. No strings. The email ended with one line. "You don't win these games by standing alone." I deleted it. That's when the real pressure started. Inspections. Delays. Sudden compliance questions. The kind that stall momentum without ever leaving fingerprints. I went to my grandmother furious. "He's bleeding us slowly." She nodded. "Good. Now you're thinking like him." I expected another strategy. Instead, she said something I wasn't ready for. "You need to decide what kind of power you want." "What does that mean?" She leaned forward. "You can win by surviving. Or you can win by ending the game." Ending the game meant exposure. Not dramatic. Not viral. Structural. We began quietly mapping Daniel's connections. His consulting trail. His financial overlaps. Not crimes, conflicts. Ethical gray zones investors hate. Then we waited. The opportunity came when one of his projects collapsed publicly due to unforeseen regulatory complications. I didn't celebrate. I acted. I offered to buy the distressed asset, not cheaply, but cleanly. Fair price. Transparent terms. The board hesitated. Then I did the thing Daniel never expected. I walked away. 2 weeks later, another fund acquired it instead and promptly sued Daniel for misrepresentation. That was the crack. From there, the unraveling was fast. Clients distanced themselves. Boards replaced him. Articles reframed his past wins as aggressive opportunism. Nothing defamatory. Just contextualized. My mother stopped defending him. One evening, she came to the hotel and sat in the lobby without makeup, without performance. "I thought control meant safety," she said. "I see now it just meant silence." I didn't forgive her. Not yet. But I believed her. Daniel sent one last message months later. "You've become exactly what you accused me of being." I read it twice. Then I replied once. "No. I became what you underestimated." I never heard from him again. The hotel didn't become an empire. It became something better. Stable. Respected. Rooted. I didn't win by destroying him. I won by refusing to orbit him. My grandmother passed away a year later. At the reading of her final letter to me, there was only one sentence. "Power isn't proven when you take it. It's proven when you don't hand it back to people who misuse it. That's what I inherited. Not the money. Not the buildings. The refusal. The hardest part didn't come when Daniel disappeared from headlines or when the hotel finally stabilized into something that felt steady again. It came afterward, in the long stretch of ordinary days where nothing dramatic happened and I had to live with who I'd become. Power leaves a residue. Even when the danger is gone, your instincts don't soften right away. I still measured rooms when I entered them, still listened for what people weren't saying, still felt the urge to justify decisions that didn't require permission. Winning taught me discipline, but it also taught me distance, and distance can quietly turn into loneliness if you're not careful. That was the season when the hotel thrived, and I didn't know whether I was proud of myself or simply exhausted by vigilance, when success felt like holding a breath instead of releasing one. The test arrived without warning, the way the real ones always do, disguised as an opportunity that looked exactly like the future everyone said I should want. A consortium approached me with a proposal that would double the valuation of the property on paper within 18 months, complete with glossy decks, friendly smiles, and language polished enough to feel safe. They didn't mention Daniel. They didn't need to. Their structure mirrored his old playbook with just enough distance to claim originality, and they praised my resilience the way people praise a storm survivor, while quietly wondering whether the storm left cracks they can exploit. They said they wanted partnership, not control, collaboration, not ownership, but the documents told a different story if you read slowly and without hope blurring the margins. I didn't bring the proposal to my mother. I didn't bring it to lawyers first. I sat with it alone for 3 nights, reading every clause until the words blurred, asking myself a question my grandmother once asked me in a different form. Am I considering this because it's right, or because I'm tired of being the one who says no? Fatigue is the most underestimated negotiator in the room. It doesn't argue. It just waits until your defenses sag and then makes compromise sound like rest. I realized that if I said yes, no one would accuse me of weakness, and if I said no, everyone would call me stubborn, and the truth was that neither label mattered as much as the quiet cost of betraying the boundary I'd learned to draw the hard way. I declined the offer politely and publicly, thanked them for their interest, and went back to work. That should have been the end of it, but the echo of that decision reached further than I expected. Within weeks, people I hadn't heard from in years reappeared, not with demands, but with advice. They framed it as concern, as mentorship, as realism, and every conversation carried the same underlying message. You don't have to fight forever. You can let someone else carry the weight. It took me longer than I cared to admit to recognize that this, too, was pressure, softer and more socially acceptable, but pressure all the same, the kind that wears down resolve by offering relief instead of threats. My mother was the last person I expected to be part of that chorus, and that's how I knew it mattered. She came to the hotel one afternoon and asked if we could walk, not to talk business, she said, just to be together. We walked the block slowly, past the bookstore that had survived, past the cafe that still fogged its windows every morning, and she told me she was tired of being afraid of making the wrong choice. She said she saw how hard I worked, how much responsibility I carried, and that she worried I was building a life defined by resistance instead of ease. When she said ease, I felt the old pull, the temptation to believe that safety could be outsourced, that vigilance could be retired, that love might finally arrive without conditions if I softened my stance. I told her something I'd never said out loud before, not to her, not to anyone, that I wasn't afraid of losing the hotel anymore, but I was afraid of losing myself by slowly trading conviction for approval. I said that every time I compromised my instincts for the sake of harmony, I paid for it later with interest, and that the peace people promised me always came with fine print. She listened without interrupting, and for once she didn't try to redirect the conversation toward her feelings or her fears. She just nodded, and in that nod I saw something unfamiliar and fragile, a recognition that she had mistaken silence for stability her entire life. The months that followed were quieter, not because the world stopped testing me, but because I stopped announcing my answers. I learned that strength doesn't require an audience, and that boundaries don't need speeches. The hotel grew in ways no spreadsheet predicted, not through expansion but through trust, through staff who stayed, through guests who returned, through neighbors who stopped worrying about being pushed out. I began to sleep without replaying conversations in my head, began to enjoy moments without scanning for threats, began to understand that vigilance can be selective instead of constant when it's grounded in self-trust rather than fear. On the anniversary of my grandmother's death, I stood on the rooftop alone as the city shifted from dusk to night, thinking about the girl I'd been when she slid that folder across the table. I understood then that the inheritance wasn't designed to test my intelligence or my courage, but my patience, my capacity to endure uncertainty without surrendering direction. She hadn't protected me from predators. She had prepared me to recognize them, and more importantly, to recognize the quieter danger of becoming one myself under the guise of pragmatism. The final lesson didn't arrive with confrontation or triumph. It arrived in the steady realization that I no longer needed to define myself in opposition to Daniel or anyone like him. I didn't win because he lost. I won because I learned how to choose without flinching, how to say no without resentment, and how to build something that didn't require someone else's downfall to stand. The hotel remained a landmark, but my life stopped revolving around defending it, and in that shift, I found the freedom I'd been promised by so many people who never understood its cost. If there is an ending to this story, it isn't a verdict or a headline or a reconciliation wrapped in forgiveness. It's a morning where I unlock the door, greet the people who chose to stay, and move through my day without bracing for impact. It's knowing that if another Daniel appears, with softer words or sharper tools, I won't mistake urgency for truth or comfort for safety. I won't confuse proximity with loyalty or inheritance with identity. I will listen, I will decide, and I will live with the consequences without handing my voice to anyone who asks for it in exchange for peace. What surprised me most wasn't how the world eventually moved on, but how long it took me to believe I was allowed to move on too. Even after the tests quieted, after the proposals stopped coming disguised as favors, there was a strange guilt that settled in, the kind that shows up when you're no longer in crisis and don't know who you are without something to fight against. For a long time, purpose had been defined by resistance, by holding a line, by staying alert, and when that posture softened, I worried I was becoming careless. It took months to understand that calm is not complacency, and that rest doesn't mean you've abandoned responsibility. It means you've finally learned how to carry it without letting it crush you. The shift happened slowly, in moments so ordinary they almost didn't register at first. I noticed it one afternoon when a problem arose at the hotel that would once have sent my pulse racing, a supplier dispute, tight deadlines, raised voices in a meeting, and instead of bracing myself, I felt steady. I listened. I asked questions. I made a decision. And when it was done, I didn't replay it in my head all night searching for hidden threats. I went home and slept. That was when I realized the real victory wasn't survival or control or even independence. It was trust, the quiet confidence that I could respond rather than react, that my judgment didn't need to be sharpened by fear to be effective. My relationship with my mother evolved in the same incremental way, without declarations or grand reconciliations. We didn't suddenly become close, and I didn't erase what had happened between us. Instead, we learned how to exist in the same space without performing for each other. She stopped offering advice disguised as concern, and I stopped measuring her words for hidden leverage. Sometimes we talked about the past, but more often we talked about nothing at all, whether books, small inconveniences, things people discuss when they're not trying to negotiate love. That ordinariness felt fragile at first, as if one wrong sentence could shatter it, but over time it proved more durable than any apology she might have offered in the heat of regret. There was one final moment that confirmed how much had changed, and it came when I least expected it. A junior manager brought me a file one morning and hesitated before speaking, the way people do when they're unsure whether honesty will be punished or welcomed. She told me a decision I'd made months earlier had created unexpected strain for her team, not because it was wrong, but because it hadn't been explained. In the past, I might have heard that as a challenge or a threat, an invitation to doubt myself. Instead, I thanked her. We talked. We adjusted. When she left my office, relieved rather than guarded, I understood something my grandmother had known all along. Authority that cannot tolerate feedback will always seek control instead of clarity. As the years settled into a rhythm, The hotel became less of a symbol and more of a place again, something grounded rather than charged with meaning. It hosted weddings, late-night conversations, quiet recoveries, and ordinary joys that had nothing to do with my story. I liked that. I liked knowing that people could pass through without sensing the battles that once defined the space. Legacy, I learned, isn't about being remembered for what you fought, but for what others are free to do, because you chose to stand your ground when it mattered. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about my grandmother and the precision with which she'd set everything in motion. She never tried to shield me from pain or disappointment. She understood that protection without agency is just another form of control, and that the most generous thing you can give someone is the chance to discover their own limits without being rescued from every consequence. She trusted me enough to let me be uncomfortable, to let me be wrong, and to let me grow into decisions instead of inheriting certainty ready-made. If there's a lesson threaded through all of this, it's not that power corrupts or that family betrays or that money ruins what it touches. It's that clarity is expensive, and most people would rather rent comfort than pay the price of knowing where they stand. I paid that price early and it hurt, but it bought me something that never depreciates: the ability to choose my direction without asking who might approve or who might leave if I don't. That knowledge didn't arrive all at once, and it didn't feel triumphant. It felt quiet, earned, and irreversible. Now, when I walk through the lobby and see the light shift across the floor in the late afternoon, I don't think about deeds or clauses or names that once carried weight. I think about continuity, about how places and people endure when they're allowed to grow without being reshaped to fit someone else's fear. I lock the door at the end of the day, not because I'm guarding something fragile, but because I respect what's inside. And when I turn the key, I know that whatever comes next, opportunity, conflict, change, I will meet it without handing over my voice, my judgment, or my future in exchange for a false sense of peace. Years later, people would still ask me about the hotel, as if it were the point of the story, as if buildings and valuations were the things that lasted. I learned to answer politely, to talk about renovations and community programs, to give them something solid to hold on to. But the truth was simpler and quieter than they expected. The hotel stayed because it was cared for, not because it was defended. It endured because it belonged to a rhythm larger than ownership, a place woven into the lives of people who had nothing to do with my name or my past. My mother and I never became the kind of family strangers like to imagine after hardship. There was no dramatic reunion, no emotional speech that erased years of misunderstanding. Instead, there was consistency. She showed up when she said she would. She stopped asking me to be smaller so she could feel safer. We learned each other again, slowly, without scripts. Some wounds don't close neatly. They scar, and scars don't disappear, but they stop hurting when you stop pressing on them. As for me, I stopped measuring my life by how well I held my ground. I let myself want things that had nothing to do with legacy or proving I deserved what I'd been given. I traveled without scanning every room. I trusted without handing over authority. I built friendships that didn't orbit my last name or my responsibilities. For the first time, my future felt like something I was walking toward instead of something I was bracing against. Sometimes, late in the evening, I would sit on the rooftop and think about my grandmother, about the way she believed in preparation more than protection. She understood that strength isn't loud and that survival doesn't always look heroic. She knew that the most meaningful inheritance isn't money or property, but the certainty that you can face pressure without surrendering yourself to it. That belief shaped everything that followed, even when I didn't recognize it at the time. The story didn't end with a victory or a loss. It ended with equilibrium, with a life that no longer needed an antagonist to define it, with the knowledge that I could be underestimated, challenged, even isolated, and still remain intact. That I could say no without anger, yes without fear, and walk away without regret when something demanded too much of me. If there's a final truth in all of this, it's this: what we protect shapes us, but what we refuse to give away defines us. I didn't keep the hotel because it was valuable. I kept myself because I learned, once and for all, that peace built on self-betrayal is never peace at all. And that understanding, more than any inheritance, is what remains.